So you guys have sent us some really interesting stuff this time. From the Bainbridge Island City Council, not just one meeting, but we're talking about a two-parter here, right?
A two-parter.
A regular public session, A&D, what looks to be a more, I don't know, maybe a little more hush-hush executive session.
Ooh.
Both held on July 9th, 2024. So let's put on our investigative hats and dive into these minutes. Executive session. That definitely has a ring of intrigue to it, doesn't it? What happens in those closed-door meetings?
Right. Well, it's not quite as cloak and dagger as it sounds. But essentially, sometimes the city council needs to have conversations with its attorney about sensitive legal matters. And those conversations are protected. There's something called RCW 42.30.11 which allows them to have these closed-door meetings to discuss litigation with legal counsel. So in this case, it looks like they were trying to avoid some potentially costly legal trouble, maybe even a lawsuit.
Lawsuits. The silent partner in so many government decisions. So while the executive session minutes themselves don't give us much to go on, the fact that it happened at all tells us there's something brewing behind the scenes, potentially with some big financial consequences for the city. And that honestly makes me even more curious to dig into the regular meeting minutes.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Especially knowing that those adverse legal or financial consequences were weighing on their minds.
Right.
And this was not a short meeting.
No, wasn't
This
it?
regular meeting. It was a marathon 3-hour session covering a huge range of topics.
Yeah.
I'm seeing everything here from Disability Pride Month to, wait, is that a discussion about bike racks?
It really runs the gamut.
It does.
Which is kind of what I love about this local government stuff. It's like, these are the hyper-local issues that directly affect people's lives every day.
Exactly.
So let's start. Let's start with the Disability Pride Month proclamation. It's always heartening to see a city council taking the time to recognize and celebrate its very diverse community. And it wasn't just a formality either. They actually had Marcia Cutting, a member of the disability community there, to accept the proclamation.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah. But then, just a few minutes later, they were diving into the nitty-gritty of parking regulations near Waterfront Park. And this wasn't just a quick mention either. Multiple people came to speak during public comments specifically about parking concerns. So it seems like that's a real hot-button issue in your neck of the woods. Trying to find parking near the waterfront on a sunny day, I'm sure you've experienced it yourself, it can be a real headache.
Oh, yeah, big time.
So here's where it gets kind of interesting. Right after returning from that mysterious executive session, they add something to the agenda last minute. Opiate litigation. Now, call me a conspiracy theorist, but I have a hunch those two things might be connected. Just a hunch. That's quite a leap, don't you think?
Maybe. But remember that kind of vague language we saw about agency enforcement and potential litigation from the executive session?
Right.
It's very possible this opiate litigation is what they were being so tight-lipped about.
Yeah. Might be onto something. Makes you wonder, are they considering joining a lawsuit against a pharmaceutical company? Or are they worried about being sued themselves?
Right.
Imagine if the city got sued and had to cut funding for parks or raise taxes. These are the things they're trying to avoid.
Yes, exactly. Shows how much goes on behind the scenes in local government. That really does directly affect residents.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears for a moment, talk about another issue that came up. Climate Commitment Act. They voted to formally oppose a state initiative, I-177, that aimed to repeal it. And they did it without much debate.
Interesting.
Any insights there?
Well, it goes back to those potential financial consequences they were so concerned about earlier. I mean, remember Robin Koski's presentation
Yeah.
in the Puget Sound Regional Council? She laid out the potential impact of repealing the Climate Commitment Act on the city's budget, particularly when it came to funding for the ferry system.
Yes, the ferries.
Always
a topic of intense interest and debate around here.
Yeah, nobody wants to mess with ferry funding.
Exactly.
So even though this was about a state-level initiative, the council was clearly thinking about the local impact and their own bottom line.
Right. Speaking of the bottom line, let's circle back to that seemingly mundane discussion about parking regulations near Waterfront Park. Turns out, it wasn't so mundane after all. They actually ended up delaying a decision because they needed more time to hash it out.
It's amazing how often these seemingly small things can stir up big passions in local politics. Everyone has an opinion when it comes to parking.
I know, it's so true.
Right.
And it just goes to show that governing is about more than just big picture ideas, right? It's about the everyday details that affect people's lives.
Absolutely.
Speaking of everyday details, they also spent some time discussing the Sound to Olympics Trail, specifically their application for a federal grant to help fund the next phase of the project.
Ah, yes. The Sound to Olympics Trail.
A perfect example of the city's commitment to recreation and the outdoors.
Absolutely.
They decided to focus on getting that Sockeye Pond Trail fully designed and built, while also getting the plans finalized for that Copper Top Middle School section. Securing funding for these big infrastructure projects is a marathon, not a sprint. But it sounds like they're making progress.
Yeah, it does.
And you know what else takes planning and careful consideration? Choosing the right design for your bike racks.
Really.
You read that right. Your city council deliberated over the aesthetics of bike parking.
Everyone loves a good bike rack debate.
Don't they, though? In their defense, they were trying to decide between a design that incorporated public art or one with planters. It's all about those visual details that make a community unique.
Right. And let's be honest, sometimes those seemingly insignificant details can be surprisingly controversial in local politics.
Yeah,
But I suppose it's a good thing. It shows that people care. It shows they're invested in their community.
absolutely. And speaking of investments, let's talk about affordable housing. The council was looking at adding the Finch Green properties to the list of areas eligible for the multifamily tax exemption program.
Okay.
Now, this is an important one. From what I understand, this program is all about incentivizing developers to build more affordable housing, which is a huge issue in so many parts of the country these days, especially in a place like Bainbridge Island, where housing costs are, shall we say, a tad high.
An understatement if I've ever heard one.
Right.
Go.
Here's the thing to remember about these tax incentive programs. They're often quite controversial.
Oh, really? Why's that? Well, you're essentially giving up potential tax revenue from developers with the hope that it'll lead to more affordable housing down the line.
Right.
Some people argue that's a worthwhile trade-off, while others worry that it's not effective enough and that there are better ways to address the affordability crisis.
Right. It's always more complicated than it seems on the surface, isn't it?
Always.
And this is a perfect example of why it's so important to look beyond the headlines, really dig into the details of these local government decisions.
Absolutely.
Because there are often complex trade-offs and competing priorities at play.
Right.
Speaking of complex issues, we can't forget about the national prescription opiate litigation. They discussed this right after that hush-hush executive session, so I'm guessing it's related to that whole potential litigation thing we talked about earlier.
It certainly seems that way.
And the fact that they went straight into a closed-door session right after discussing it
Right.
suggests that they're taking this very seriously, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that while transparency is crucial in a democracy, there are times when city leaders need to have those very frank and sometimes very difficult conversations in private,
Right.
especially when legal strategies are involved.
And,
Mm-hmm.
while we don't have all the details, we do know that opiate addiction has had a devastating impact on communities all across the country.
For sure.
So this is likely a topic that hits close to home for many of your listeners.
Yeah, sadly, that's very true. Could this be a sign that your city council is considering joining other municipalities and suing pharmaceutical companies?
Mm-hmm.
Or perhaps they're bracing for a lawsuit themselves. It's hard to say for sure without more information.
Yeah, it really is.
But that's kind of part of what makes following local government so fascinating, isn't it? It's like a slowly unfolding drama with real-world stakes.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are your final takeaways after spending some time with these very interesting meeting minutes?
I sat down with these documents, and I thought it was going to be a very dry run-through of bureaucratic procedures. But it was so much more than that.
It always is, right?
Right.
It really is. Who knew that bike rack aesthetics could spark such debate?
Or that a seemingly simple parking issue could be so complicated.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, it really highlights the breadth of issues that a city council grapples with on a daily basis.
It does.
It's about balancing competing interests, making tough financial decisions, and ultimately trying to make their communities better places for everybody.
That's right.
And for our listener out there, we hope this deep dive has given you a little behind-the-scenes glimpse at your local government. We've only scratched the surface, but hopefully it'll spark some curiosity. Because at the end of the day, this is your city. It's your city council, and yes, It's even your bike racks. So what questions does this deep dive raise for you? What would you say during public comment? Informed citizens are truly the heart of a thriving local democracy. So until next time, keep asking those questions, keep digging deeper, and keep it local